Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to step back in time and dig into a very specific, honestly incredibly poignant moment in history. We are looking at the American home front in early June of 1944, specifically in Chula Vista, California. And what we're really going to explore today is the quiet, almost invisible tension of waiting. This isn't a story about the battlefields. It's about the living rooms, the backyards, and the factories. We're going to unpack the daily reality of a young family, Betty, Fred, and their baby Randy, as they navigate the massive weight of a global war right from their own neighborhood streets. So let's jump right in.
Picture this for a second, because it really captures the atmosphere we're exploring. On the one hand, you have the micro, the immediate, everyday physical environment of Chula Vista. June brings these warm, salt-scented mornings off the bay, and the bougainvillea is blooming in just extravagant, absolute color. It's beautiful, right? It feels perfectly normal. But constantly looming over all that beauty is the macro, the immense, undeniable reality of the war. For Fred, the bright colors of the flowers are completely overshadowed by something else entirely: the mail slot in his front door. He's actually developed this tight, anxious habit of checking the mail the literal second he gets home. And why? Because the draft notice, if it comes, is going to arrive in a plain, totally unassuming envelope, just like an electric bill. Imagine living with that contrast every single day. The bright, sensory beauty of an ordinary morning constantly clashing with the silent dread of waiting for one single letter that could change your whole life forever.
And, as you might guess, that tension absolutely does not just stay at home. It bleeds right into Fred's professional life, too. Fred works at Roar Aircraft, which was part of the massive wartime aviation industry. In the second week of June, that vague, lingering anxiety becomes startlingly concrete. His supervisor, Garfield, calls him into a glass-windowed office and asks Fred to start training a replacement, a careful, methodical, 54-year-old man named Walter Hooper. Now, Hooper is older. He isn't going to be drafted. The younger men are leaving for the service literally by the thousands, and the factory simply has to keep running. So suddenly, the war is sitting right across the desk from Fred.
What's profoundly heavy about this interaction is just how brief it is. Fred asks, "All of my accounts?" And Garfield replies, "All of them." Let's just sit with that silence for a second. Neither man needs to say the word draft. They don't need to discuss the war at all. The professional courtesy of keeping it strictly about the accounts actually highlights this massive unspoken understanding between them. Fred's time on the home front? It's officially limited. So, the crucial question here is, how do you even react to news like that? Fred goes home, somehow managing to skip the dread, and immediately seeks out his wife, Betty. He finds her in the backyard, sketching the afternoon light filtering through a newly planted lemon tree, and he tells her the news. And instead of panicking, look at this remarkably grounded plan Betty lays out. First, train Hooper thoroughly. Second, do the job well, until whenever that inevitable day comes. And finally, if the notice doesn't come, be grateful. They are making a very deliberate choice to focus only on what they can actually control.
And it really brilliantly illustrates their coping mechanism. That's all there is. It's a philosophical acceptance of a reality they absolutely cannot change. Picture this. As they are having this incredibly heavy conversation about the trajectory of their family's actual survival, they're sitting there watching their 8-month-old baby Randy happily untie his own left shoe with total absolute baby self-satisfaction. Fred leans over, reties the tiny shoe, and agrees. Yes, that's all there is. Life simply keeps moving forward in these tiny, everyday domestic increments.
Now for Betty, navigating this agonizing period of waiting requires strict routine and, above all, mobility. Her secret weapon is something that might seem kind of quaint to us today, but was completely revolutionary for her: the baby buggy. This wasn't just a carriage. It was the organizing technology of her entire morning. Think about it. Without it, she's literally anchored to the house, physically carrying a heavy, squirming 7-month-old everywhere. With it, the world opens up. She meticulously maps out her neighborhood routes. She visits the park, stops by the local grocery store, where Mr. Kovach absolutely adores little Randy, and eventually makes her way down to Shasta Street. And what she finds on Shasta Street is a vital, totally informal support network of mothers who gather on these warm June mornings. You've got Pauline, whose husband is somewhere in the army in Europe; Helen, whose husband is stationed at the Naval Air Station; and Francis, whose husband is out at sea on a destroyer escort. They sit together, they drink whatever coffee they can piece together with their ration books, and they just talk. They don't indulge in high drama. They converse with the quiet fortitude of women who are all carrying the exact same heavy burden together. I really want you to empathize with the immense emotional strength it takes just to maintain that level of everyday neighborhood normalcy. But of course, sometimes the reality of that burden slips through in small, staggering details. 3. That is the number of minutes Frances got to speak to her husband when his ship briefly ported in Pearl Harbor. He managed to get to a phone. 3 minutes. And that was after 8 agonizing months of total waiting and absolute silence. 3 minutes of a faint, crackling voice to sustain her through 8 months of fear. When Betty hears this, it sharply reminds her of her own fragile fortune, that despite the looming draft, Fred is still coming home to her every single evening. Now, right in the middle of all this heavy global tension, there is this brilliant, lighthearted anchor of normalcy, and that's baby Randy's unstoppable progression. At 7 months, he's got 4 teeth arriving, which means absolutely everything is a candidate to be chewed on. By mid-June, he's aggressively pulling himself up on furniture. We're talking couches, coffee tables, Fred's pant legs. He manages to stand for 30, 40, sometimes a full 60 seconds with the fierce concentration of someone performing complex math before totally losing his balance and sitting down hard. This steady growth is just a profound reminder that while the adult world is collectively holding its breath, the baby's world is expanding rapidly, completely unaware of the war. And this brings us to the immense importance of rituals during times of uncertainty. Sunday dinners on Fern Street with Betty's extended family provided a deeply sensory grounding for everyone. Think of the open windows catching the breeze, the early summer flush of Emily's rose garden, and the reliable, comfortable smell of Sunday pot roast cooking in the kitchen. In the middle of this garden, Betty practices the delicate art of simply being still. She watches her husband and father examine tomato plants, actively trying to burn that peaceful memory into her mind so she can draw on it later.
It's in these quiet Sundays that we see the intimate, really crucial moments of family survival. We see older generations passing down gentle reassurance. At one point, Georgiana, an older family member, is holding baby Randy, quietly studying his hands. She speaks softly to him in Dutch, and when Betty asks what she said, Georgiana translates, "You are well loved, little one. Welcome to the family." It is a beautiful, sheltering promise spoken directly into a very, very dangerous world.
Okay, so the atmosphere shifts dramatically on the second Sunday in June. The family gathers in a larger park in the center of Chula Vista with a bigger group of friends. They've brought this large Zenith battery-powered radio on a dolly, ostensibly to listen to baseball. But baseball isn't the only thing crackling through the airwaves. Careful, heavily censored news from the outside world is trickling in. Neighbors are sharing fragments of letters that took weeks to arrive, calculating delays, desperately trying to find some kind of comfort in the unpredictable arithmetic of wartime mail delivery.
Which brings us to a massive historical pivot. How do you actually process the turning of the tide? Imagine sitting in that sunny park with your family. Their friend Dick Tazelaire shares something monumental he heard at work. The papers have been completely full of it since the 6th of June. It's the Normandy landings, D-Day. The massive, coordinated Allied invasion of France has finally begun.
Now, the reaction isn't immediate jubilation. It's desperate, exhausted hope. Rod says, if it holds, if they can hold what they've taken. And George replies, with the sheer conviction of a man who absolutely needs it to be true, it'll hold. This perfectly captures a home front that has been waiting so incredibly long for the tide to turn that they're almost entirely afraid to believe it finally has. Their local, everyday tension in Chula Vista is now permanently locked to the fate of those soldiers fighting on far-off beaches.
And for Fred, this monumental news immediately forces a really painful realization. While the world's focus is suddenly glued to the Atlantic Theater and the beaches of Normandy, Fred's mind races straight to the Pacific Theater. Because his own brother, Ed, is up in Portland on an amphibious assault ship, preparing to sail south into danger. It's a different ocean, it's a completely different theater. But it is the exact same enormous war. The global turning point instantly reminds Fred of his own deeply personal fears.
I want to wrap up this explainer with an incredibly powerful thought. Back at that Sunday dinner, 90-year-old great-grandfather Austin holds baby Randy. Austin has lived through nearly a century of radical change. And looking at this baby who is going to inherit the post-war world, he says, "You're going to know all kinds of things that none of us could have imagined. That's how it's supposed to work." It's just a profound reflection on the generational passage of time. As the adults sit there waiting in the dark shadow of war, the next generation is already pulling itself up, ready to step into an entirely unknown future. So what unimaginable things are we preparing the next generation for today? Keep that in mind as you go about your day. Thanks for joining me, and keep learning.